Coach, the first question I have for you is you turned 68 in September. Am I correct?
Just turned 69.
69 in September,
Yep.
right? I say that I'm asking this question as a 66-year-old who is entering his, I think, 37th or 38th year of coaching. Do you still enjoy it at this age? And what's changed more, you or the game, in relationship to the relationship you have with your players?
Well, first of all, I do enjoy it, Greg, and thanks for having me on this. I always enjoy these discussions, and I've said to people often, especially since I've been here at Denver, that there's 2 days that make me convinced that this is what I want to continue to do, as God willing, health-wise and everything. And number one is when freshmen come back in the fall. It's such a, even this year in the craziest of situations, it's such an amazing day. You finally come to fruition with these kids you've been recruiting for a couple of years. They're with you, their parents are with you, and it all becomes real. So having that is really exciting. And then, of course, opening day, the first face-off of the first game. If you still have the jitters at my age, then you're still loving it. And, so yeah, as long as I've always said, as long as I have those feelings, as long as I can still stand, the negative parts of recruiting, I want to continue to do this for another while.
You were at Levittown in the early part of your career as a high school coach. If you could talk to that 20-something aged coach, could you have told him you'd still be coaching at this age?
Well, when I got to Levittown Memorial, which was my high school, I actually achieved my lifetime goal. The trouble with it was like you mentioned, I was 29, 28 years old, and my lifetime goal was to be the head football coach of my high school. And I became that. And after one season of being the head football coach, my best friend, another Cortland grad, Ray Rostan, had been the head coach at RIT, the head lacrosse coach, and he just took the job in August over at Ithaca College. So there was movement going on. And even though I kind of achieved my lifetime goal at, in 1979, being a head football coach, I moved on after one season and then went up to RIT and started this college lacrosse career. So, I don't think I thought too much about the future. By the time I was 30, I had 4 kids under 5, and all I was thinking about was putting food in their mouths.
What makes Levittown so tough? Because, you think of all the players that came out of there, from Scott Rogers to the Burns. There's some unbelievable players. Now, it's obviously a blue-collar kind of community, but it's produced some serious players and some serious coaching talent.
Yeah, Levittown was such a great place to grow up. It was a farmland that was cleared after World War II, and they put 17,000 houses up in 3 years, and 70,000 people came upon the place in no time. And of course, all of those GIs, when they're coming back from war, they were having babies like it was going out of style. And so, I grew up on a block that had 18 houses on it, and I think 42 kids. And so you played from sunrise to, as our parents used to say, be in the house when the lights go out, which was usually about 8 or 9 o'clock at night. And you made up games, and the boys and the girls played together, whether it was kill the guy with the ball or touch football. That, it didn't count if you touched them. It counted if you knocked them down, and all sorts of different things. And then, of course, having the 5 high schools in Levittown with those kind of rivalries, and the great coaches like Nick Belitzis and Phil Wolf that I had, it was just mayhem all the time. And so, and my dad was a beer truck driver, which was typical then. You had cops, you had teachers, you had truck drivers, you had all those kind of guys. And, you could, as I've always described it, you knew 2 things in Levittown. You could walk into anybody's house and get a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. And if you didn't say thank you, you could also get a smack upside the head by the mom or the dad. And so you knew to clean up, you knew to say please and thank you, you knew to be in on time, and you knew it was going to be a long, exciting day.
We're about the same age, and I think of the suburban areas of Detroit that I grew up in, and I think of a blue collar community as was a badge of honor in the day, certainly.
I'll bet. Yeah, no question.
True. We're fortunate enough to be talking with the University of Denver head coach Bill Tierney on Michigan Lacrosse Review. My name is Greg Norman. Coach, we appreciate your time spending with us. The renowned Bill Tierney, 7 NCAA championships. For some reason, Coach, they talk about 6 at Princeton, and then they talk about 1 west of the Mississippi. And I never understood that geographic distinction as if it meant something, because I don't know of any other sport that measures championships from where you coached. Does that hit you as kind of funny when they tell you those things?
Well, I in one way it does, but if you look at the map of lacrosse, right, it's been everybody that's ever won one has touched the Atlantic Ocean. So I think that was more of a, how do we say this, since the other further west one was North Carolina, so right. How do we say this? So I think it's just become kind of a thing to say, whether it's western Mississippi, west of Pennsylvania, west of this, west of that. I do think that the significance of it was that when I took the job here, the woman who hired me, Peg Bradley Doppus, was an amazing athletic director. She set forth the challenge of not only trying to win a national championship at Denver, but also help the game spread out west, which I knew it had already spread out west.
Right.
I ran Tony Seaman and I ran a day camp at Detroit Country Day back in in the late 80s, and there were some really good players, including David Morrow, who came out of that. And so we've had kids from Ohio every year at Princeton. I had kids from Colorado. Tony had a couple of great ones from California. So we kind of knew what other people didn't know, but we took credit for it.
I talk all the time. I'm the secretary of our coaching association here for the high schools in Michigan. And we always talk about this new sport. And I keep pointing out to us that we've been around for 50 years. Nothing against it, but in terms of prep athletics, 50 years is not, you can't call yourself a adolescent anymore. You just can't. It's not a fair description, at least in
some of us would like to, but we can't.
Right. Easiest start an interview is to start from beginning, and obviously from Levittown you went to Cortland. Maybe you just talk a little bit about how you ended up there and a little bit about the university. And if you could touch on, you guys played in a quarterfinal game, I think in 1972 against Navy, and beat them. And I think that was maybe one of the first real sort of rock stones kind of an approach to the sport that, kind of caught attention. If I remember right, I remember reading in the back of Sports Illustrated, and that's in the day that was the Bible that we all read about Cortland beating Navy. And I think that was a huge significant thing in the sport of lacrosse. Yeah.
Well, I went I went to Levittown Memorial, where I also came back and coached later on. But when I went to Cortland, I had decided, due to having great coaches all the way from Little League baseball all the way through high school. I mentioned my 2 high school coaches before. I didn't play lacrosse in high school. It had just gotten started for a few years. I was a holdout baseball guy, but as one of the writers referred to me as a sore-armed third baseman, had to turn to lacrosse. My freshman year, I had a young man named Dan Viglione, who was also a Levittown guy, different high school, was one of my best friends, and he was a lacrosse goalie, and I played freshman football. I wanted to be a football guy. My life's goal was to be my high school's head football coach, which I became later on. But just enamored with this lacrosse, playing baseball at Cortland in upstate New York, maybe a little bit like playing in Michigan in February and March.
Right.
Just it wasn't real great when you hit the ball, and it wasn't real great when you missed the ball. So we had freshman teams back then, so we played a freshman football schedule and talked into playing freshman lacrosse. Thankfully, weren't many guys that had played before on our team, I think 6 or 7, and was able to get in and play and start and have a pretty good freshman year, and then moved on to trying to make the varsity with Coach Emmer and Coach Winters as our coaches, and luckily made the team as a sophomore. And then, as you mentioned, as a junior, it's actually the history of it goes back to sophomore year, when we had a really good year, and there was only one tournament back then, NCAA tournament, and that was the big schools, the Division I. And so we had a really good year, and we didn't get into the tournament. And so the bumper stickers for the next year, which was 1972, was Cortland lacrosse avenged the screw in 72. And so we had a little chip on our shoulder, and went down and had some great games. We beat Cornell that year, and that was a first. And Hobart was a big rivalry. We beat them, and so we had a great year and were invited to the tournament. Navy had a great year, and so we were going to play at the Naval Academy. This is when you only had 8 teams in the NCAA tournament, and we were playing Navy at Navy, and no one thought we were going to win. In fact, 3 or 4 busloads of Cortland guys. This was back in the Vietnam era, where guys, grungy would be a good term for well-dressed. And
Woodstock.
and as the national anthem is playing at the U.S. Naval Academy, 3 or 4 busloads of these Cortland people are coming over the walls at the Naval Academy, which was somewhat embarrassing for us, but still pretty cool. And we were on to win that game, and then actually played Virginia in the semifinals at Cortland, because they turned the game back. This was before Final Fours and all that stuff. We ended up losing to Virginia, who won the national championship that year, but it was just an amazing run, and just a great group of guys to play with.
At Cortland, did you want to be a school teacher? Is that where it started out, and being a coach?
Yeah, these guys who motivated me, especially my high school coaches, Nick Belitzis and Phil Wolf, they motivated me to want to be a phys ed teacher and a high school coach. All the men in my life. My dad was a beer truck driver. He wasn't, I didn't learn until his last year of being alive that he did come to a lot of my games, but he thought he made me nervous, so he would hide in the background. And but a lot of my coaches were mentors for me, and they meant so much to me, and how much they meant in my life, that I wanted to have that impact on young people as well. The reason I went to Cortland is because my older sister was at Springfield at the time, and she was going to be a phys ed teacher, and Springfield cost $3,100 a year at the time, and Cortland was only $2,300. So that was my choice. I had it made for me.
How does one pick up lacrosse as a freshman in college and become a competent player enough to play at the varsity level by the time he's a sophomore or junior?
Well, luckily back then we had coaches with big hearts, and the first year we played with wooden sticks. The second year was when plastic came in, and it was new to everybody. It's just, I guess I was a pretty good athlete. I had pretty good IQ. Hadn't played obviously much lacrosse, but Coach Emmer was really good to me, and Ray Rostan and Jack Verdi, some of us who had never played, made that team, and actually, didn't play a heck of a lot, that's for sure. Didn't get really a chance to play much until my senior year, but still surrounded by great people, and you got better every day. A guy by the name Stan Kowalski was my freshman coach, and he was a great player at the time as well. So we were just blessed to be at the right place at the right time, which has been truly my whole lacrosse career, has been being at the right place at the right time.
I mentioned, as we were talking before, one of our local athletic directors, Bob Dowd, when he talks about Central New York and Cortland and all the rest of it, he said one of the things he said that in the early days was that the guys that played at the collegiate level always came home, and it was always the give back time to make sure that they could help their high school kids and the middle school kids out. And there was much more of a connection between those who left and the alumni than even places now. And he said that was one of the hallmarks for the success, because these guys would go off and be coached by Coach Simmons or something, and then come back and bring the latest, whatever the latest techniques were. And that's not something I don't think is used as much anymore, mostly because we're a larger sport. But you guys had something in Central New York that I think was pretty terrific.
Yeah, and Cortland has turned out a lot of great lacrosse coaches over the years, and blessed to be a part of that. But you did want to go back home and teach. That's kind of what you were, and coaching was part of teaching. You didn't get, you probably got $500 or $600 more in your salary to be a head coach, but
Right.
you didn't think that way, and especially being from a place like Levittown, where, now that I've been away for a long time, but back then you used to think it was the center of the universe. So to be a kid there, grow up there, a high school athlete there, and then be able to come back and be a teacher and a coach was kind of a worthy goal at the time, or at least considered worthy. That's for sure.
From a high school career, you end up going to, I think, a Division III school, Rochester Institute of Technology. Had some success early at that university. And
Yeah, well, Ray Rostan, as I mentioned earlier, was the coach there before me, and Ray had actually two things. Number one, he had built the program to be ready to be good. And then he had also recruited a couple of my players from Levittown. So I actually went from coaching these guys as seniors to then coaching them as freshmen again. And Ed Purcell and Tommy Sill were able to help me carry the culture from there. We had a good group. We had some guys come in that were a guy named Keith Vadas was transferred back from, he was a Rochester kid, went to Maryland his first year, transferred back, and he was a 2 or 3 time All-American at RIT. And it just came together. And, I remember getting up there on, moved in with my wife and at the time 3 kids and with one on the way. And it was January 30th, and it never got above 0 for about the first 3 weeks we were there. Remember doing a clinic for Paul Wareham and Mike Messier over at Syracuse and Coach Simmons, and being welcomed to upstate New York pretty quickly, and had 3 good years there. We made the NCAA tournament my last 2 years, and then fortunate to be found by Bob Scott at Hopkins to be to Don Zimmerman's assistant there the next 3 years.
When did you know this was going to be a vocation, a lifelong vocation? Was it always that way, or was it as you got through the process? Because obviously you go to college, wanted to be a football coach, and now you end up as a lacrosse guy. When did it sink in?
Well, I think it sunk in when I made that decision at the end of, because my interview for RIT was in December. It was actually the week before Christmas. And I had just been through that first year of being the head football coach at my high school, which, as I said, was my goal. So here I was set. And my wife and I had a house in Levittown. We had 3 kids and 1 more on the way. And I was making $19,000 a year. So I was golden, it was, life was set for me. And then when I got that call from Lou Spiatti over at RIT saying he wanted to hire me, that's when I knew, okay, if I'm going to do this, we're going to do it right. And thankfully I've had a lifelong partner. Just had my 44th anniversary the other day with my wife, Helen, and she's been always willing to say, all right, let's do it. And so we did it for a few years up at RIT, and I knew then it was what I wanted to do.
Is the money at RIT as a head coach equal to that money as an assistant coach at Johns Hopkins?
Actually, I took a $3,000 pay cut when I went from Levittown to RIT. When I said, Lou, I'm making $19,000 at Levittown. Of course, I was coaching 3 sports and a phys ed teacher. He said, it's 16.5 whether you like it or not. I said, all right. So we moved to Spencerport and lived on 16.5 for 3 years. I think I got a raise or 2 in there. And then at Hopkins, I started at, I think 21 or 22,000. So
you and Don were both in your late 20s, early 30s, right?
That's right. Yeah.
Did you recognize, well, you don't recognize at that age how talented you are, but Don was a young guy too. So was it a learning curve for both of you coming up at that level?
Yeah, when Zim was the head coach, because Henry Ciccarone had left the prior
Right.
at the end of the prior fall, and Zim became the head lacrosse coach and won the national championship in his first year as the head lacrosse coach. But he was also the soccer coach. So when Zim and Bob Scott hired me, actually the guys who helped me get the job were Larry Quinn, who was my goalie at Levittown, who was an altar boy at my wedding, and John DiTommaso, who was Larry's best friend and was from Farmingdale, the next town over from Levittown. So these guys, kind of campaigned for me to get this assistant's job. But I had to tell a little white lie to Bob Scott about my soccer experience, because 3 years prior to that, I was the head football coach. And so, but luckily I had spent some time with Doug May, who was the soccer coach at RIT, and we faked our way through that. Doug and I called him every day. And I was very honest. The soccer kids and the lacrosse kids at Hopkins are different breeds. All the soccer kids were engineers and pre-med guys. And I could be very honest with those guys. I said, look, fellas, there's 2 things we got to understand here. Number one, I don't know anything about soccer. And but I can give great halftime speeches and get you in shape. And we went that way. And actually, my third year as the soccer coach, we made the NCAA tournament. Hopkins soccer had only had one winning year in 50 years prior to that. So I had kind of started understanding that for me, the way to look good as a coach was to continue to take these jobs that hadn't been real good before I got there, and build them up. And in fact, the people at Princeton, when I got hired there a few years later, said that the soccer coaching thing really helped me get the lacrosse coaching thing at Princeton. So I was blessed all the way through to get that job.
One of my favorite quotes from Kevin Corrigan from Notre Dame. I asked him when the Notre Dame job became important. He says the day they hired me.
Yeah, exactly.
I like that. Maybe just touch briefly. We all grew up. I coached Michigan State's women for quite a while. And when Mark Hollis, the athletic director, called, I said, "You realize I've never seen a women's lacrosse game before." I said, when they lay their sticks on the ground in the very first game, I told my attack to pick the stick up, and he said, "Well, I got to mark my spot on the field." And I pointed out where that was this is kind of a dumb effing sport. And I got a yellow card because the young female official was standing right next to me and he couldn't use that kind of language. We learned eventually and kind of worked our way through it. But my point to it is that I think specialization wasn't a part of the world that we grew up in. It certainly is now. But all those experiences that you had in other sports, I'm assuming, had to be great technique and great promise for what you became as a coach. You draw on those things all the time, I would think.
No question. And whenever anybody is nice enough to say something good about me as a coach, I always refer back to my last high school coaching experience, which was coaching girls basketball. It was in December, and it was just before I had to leave to go to RIT, and maybe January, before I had to go to RIT, and we were at Levittown and we played Westbury High School, and this team pressed us from the time we got off the bus till the time we got on the bus, and we were winning 2-0. We scored the first basket and the last basket and lost 72-4. So whenever anybody tells me I'm a good coach, I always tell that story because I lost my last high school coaching game 72-4.
I have a chance to do some interviews for a sailing thing in the summertime. And Gary Jobson, who's a world famous tactician and ESPN commentator, he played junior varsity basketball back in Maryland. And I said, "What did you learn from playing junior varsity basketball?" He said, "I learned to be humble because, the process was I was winning 15 and 16 years old. I was winning national championships and international championships, but I couldn't get off the bench in a basketball game." Exactly. You learn very quickly to shut up and just, and learn from there.
We all need that. That's for sure.
What did you learn from Don Zimmer in those days?
Oh man, Zim was the best, and still to this day is the best as far as demanding the basics. I mean, if you didn't throw if you didn't throw the ball overhand and you didn't catch it correctly and you weren't in the right spot, then you started all over again. He actually, as I went further in my career, got to Princeton and watched Pete Carrill coach basketball. Very similar, very, very similar. Zim was patient and he was emphatic about preparation. He believed that, he believed in good practices and believed in preparing your team, over preparing your team. And if I learned anything from Zim, which I learned a lot, it was that we can, and all these years later, we can all go, we can all have all the fancy stuff and the new stuff, but if you don't have the basics, you're not going to make it. The other thing he taught me was, in lacrosse, probably other sports too, but in lacrosse, what I always say to young coaches is, if you think you have a new idea, it happened 20 years ago. And if you think something's old, hang on to it because it'll happen 20 years from now again, Mm-hmm. What's old is new and what's new is old. And it just keeps, like laundry, it just keeps going around and around.
You mentioned Princeton. You went to Princeton from Johns Hopkins, and you went on to 6 championships. Talk about the transition and maybe a little bit of time at Princeton.
Well, one of the first games I coached at Princeton was against Hopkins. And
wow.
And it was at Manhasset High School on Long Island, and we lost 9-0. And, I thought I was this hotshot young coach. It was actually our second game of the year. And we won our first game at Princeton. We beat Bucknell. And so I thought knew what I was talking about, and then proceeded to go 2-13 that year. And then my last game of my second year, we had a chance to go 500, which was kind of our goal because we were rebuilding. That was for sure. And we played Hofstra, and if we had won, we would have ended up 7-7. We ended up losing it. We ended up 6-8. And from that point on, it was just transitioned into kind of winning a couple of Ivy games, winning more Ivy games than losing, winning the Ivy League championship, and just kind of progressing through that. And then in my fifth year, winning our first national championship in '92.
What was the catalyst that got you from Hopkins to Princeton?
It was time. It was time. I had actually applied to. I knew Princeton had a great history in lacrosse, but not recent history. They had kind of fallen on some tough times in that mid '80s, and then so I wanted to be a head coach. I was appreciative of all the time. I remember Bob Scott saying to me, I kind of wasn't sure about should I take this, and I said we had just won our second of national championship at Hopkins in '87 in 3 years, and I said to Scotty, should I do this? And he said, how much are they paying you? And I said, $39,000. He goes, well, I ain't paying you more than 26. So I think it's time to go. And it's kind of like he meant that in a lot of different ways. And
right.
he knew it was time for me to move on. And we had been successful, and Zim and he had been so instrumental in my growth. I learned more those 3 years at Hopkins, especially from a guy named Freddie Smith, who was the defensive coordinator the first 2 years. And then I was defensive coordinator in '87, our last year. And I learned so much from Freddie. And so it was time. It was just time to move on and take on a new challenge.
Of the 6 championships you won, is there a favorite, or are they all equally the same value? Is the first one better than the last one?
Well, I compare the first one at Princeton to the one here at Denver. Hopefully the first one at Denver, in that it's so new, so surprising. So everybody kind of is, as we were talking about the out west thing, but I have to admit, in 2001, when I won with my 2 sons on the field, that was pretty special. And I still get kind of choked up about thinking about how blessed I was to have that experience. But each of those teams, our 96, 97, 98 guys, those 3 win 3 years in a row. The '94 group was with Kevin Lowe and Scott Bacigalupo was phenomenal. And then certainly in 2001 with Trevor and Brendan on the field. So you have all these, when you talk about each one, you can conjure up reasons for that to have been the special one. '97, we went undefeated. So lots of different reasons to think each one was the most special.
Do you find it hard to recruit in the Ivy League? Listen, you're already getting an elite group of kids anyway, academically, but you find it hard to recruit in the Ivy League when there's no scholarships? Did that ever really?
No, actually, the Ivy League, and I've learned more and more about scholarships versus non-scholarships now that I have them. What the Ivy League, certainly Princeton prepared me for was to make sure that we were coaching, and Hopkins the same. We were coaching really good students, but I didn't think of it at the time as good news. But whenever you go to one of these games, or you scout a high school game, or one of these tournaments, back at the time Tony Seaman and Dave Cottle and I were running Top 205, which was the big recruiting tournament of the year. When you looked at 10 kids, you knew that only two or three would qualify you, and that was sometimes disappointing. But it also made for some pretty easy recruiting to narrow the scope down. So back then you were recruiting seniors. You had about 4 or 5 weekends to bring them all in. Dave Metzbauer, who was with me for 20 years, we would bring in 5 groups of 5 kids, 25 to 30 kids each year. And we can only take 10. And to be honest with you, it always tended to work out that you would get 10 that wanted to come, and maybe maybe you'd have to turn one or two away, but for the most part, they'd also end up going to another great school. So now with, things have changed so much now, but back then, even though I thought of it as a detriment, not having to deal with, the financial aid office dealt with the parents and all that. So never had to talk about how much money you were paying, how much money you got. It was up to you and them. And if it didn't work out, it didn't work out. We'd move on to someone else.
What was easier to recruit, after the 2-13 season or after that national championship season?
Well, I remember, it's a great question. I remember Scott Bacigalupo. I had recruited him. To come in 91, and we played Hopkins at Hopkins in 90. And he was a Baltimore kid, so he came to the game, and he came to our post-game reception. We had lost 20-8, and he looked me in the eye, and this was the best goalie in the country, valedictorian of his high school class, just a superstar young man. And he looked at me after the game, and he goes, "What have I gotten myself into?" And I said, "Just hang in there with me, Scott. Hang in there. We're gonna win. We're gonna win a couple." And sure enough, as a sophomore and as a senior, he won 2 national championships. So thankfully, he hung in there because he was one of the major reasons we did.
You had a great career with both your sons. The family. Lacrosse became a family sport. Your daughter's now coaching at Kent State.
Right.
You had a chance to spend some time with her last spring. We took a club team down that I coach here, a college team, and played at Kent State before the break. And we were playing on a field that they were coaching, where they were practicing next to it. That being the case, it's become a family deal. Trevor, I think, is an assistant at Princeton. Am I right?
No, Trevor, all 4 of my kids have coached lacrosse somewhere and
Right.
sometimes. So Trevor was my assistant out here in Denver for the first 5 years. He came out here from Princeton when he graduated and was Jamie Monroe's assistant Trevor's first year out here, and introduced me to in fact, the first weekend of practice that year in 2002, where Brendan was still on our team, my son Brendan, we scrimmaged Denver when they came out, and we hosted them for dinner. And I met a young man named Matt Brown, who was a freshman at the time, who's now my associate head coach. So Trevor's my assistant here and associate head coach my first 5 years. And then he got out to go into developmental psychology. He got his master's from Harvard. And then Brendan, my son, Brendan, who works for Nike, he's been with Nike out in Oregon for 12 or 13 years. He coached high school lacrosse out there for a while. And then Courtney, my oldest daughter, she stayed in New Jersey when Helen and I moved out here. She actually was an assistant lacrosse coach up until this year, but she loved basketball. She's always been a basketball player, played basketball at college at Franklin and Marshall, and been a head basketball coach at the Pingree School in New Jersey. And then, as you mentioned, Brian, my youngest, is the head lacrosse coach at Kent State now. So I'm proud of all of them. I guess the tutelage or the lack of brains or whatever, however you want to put it, they've all been in coaching for at least a little while, and just blessed to have had 4 great kids that have supported me through this thing.
Now, you were quoted as saying at the time, I think 2008, that maybe it's time to move, which is where the Denver opportunity came from. Princeton had kind of run its course, and I think you had done all you could have done at Princeton. How did Denver get on the map, and maybe walk us through that transition?
Yeah, it was, we had actually bounced back in 2009 at Princeton. We were 2 goals away from beating Cornell to go to the Final Four. Jeff Tambroni was a coach then. He did a great job. They beat us at Hofstra. But I felt like, 2 things I've always said about leaving a job. Number one, I wanted to leave it better than I found it, which in 2009, I left it better than I found it in 1987. And I wanted to leave the cupboard full, which coming in as I left Princeton, we had, Thomas Schreiber coming in, maybe the best player, certainly one of the best midfielders that ever played the game, and that lineage of guys. So we felt like we were leaving it at a good time. And it was kind of a selfish decision to come out here. But by that time, having been in coaching for, a lot of years and had won those national championships at Princeton, a lot of ADs, college ADs, had been calling me to help them through the process, through the selection of coaching process, And Peg did the same. She called me up. She said, "We have this opening. Would you come out? You know, I know your son's out here. Trevor was out here at the time, and would you come out and help us through this?" I said, "Sure." And then we were supposed to have a meeting at 9 the next morning. I got a phone call at 7 saying, "Be dressed at 7:30. We have a different meeting for you." And I got there, and turns out the whole board of trustees, 50 people, was waiting for me to walk in. And it was, I was kind of a sneak attack of, guess what? We have nobody, we're not talking to other people. We're talking to you, pal. And it was just so overwhelming. And Peg, after that meeting, I sat right next to Pat Bolin, who was the owner of the Broncos, just recently passed away. And all these great, Ron Graham was the associate AD here. He played in 8 teams in the NHL. And you walk onto this campus, and you're looking at the Rocky Mountains, and you're looking over this beautiful campus. And, Peg said, "What's it going to take to get you here?" I said, "Well, it's probably a good time. And here's what I think I need. I want to win a national championship. So here's what you have to do to give me the opportunity to do that." They met every need. And we've got a great stadium. Peter Barton Stadium had been built some years earlier than that. And, Trevor was here. He wanted to join on, and he said to me, "We got to bring this Matt Brown guy on." And we brought Matt on, and all of a sudden we were in the works and had some great recruits already here. The cupboard was not empty here. We had some great kids. Mark Matthews, was the leader of that crew. And, just built our way up to that national championship in 2015.
I think Jamie set a tone for Denver to be sort of an offensive juggernaut and sort of more an offensive program and a defensive program. You bring defense to the table. So Matt Brown, I want to talk a little bit about him. If he's not one of the top 3 offensive minds in the sport, I'm not sure who is.
Exactly.
We study a lot of your stuff because I like to think of myself as an offensive guy, and you can learn from all kinds of folks. But was it easier recruiting and coaching at Denver at a more public university than it would be at an Ivy League school? Did that help as well? And then the follow-up to that is the university had already discovered Canadians, and you didn't really stop that at all. You ended up with all kinds of guys from above the border. So that you had a completely different transition than you might have had at Princeton.
Well, one thing you learn as a head coach, and this over all the years, is if you think your way is the only way, then you're not going to last very long. And,
right.
What Matt convinced me of very quickly is, okay, you and Trevor do this defensive stuff. We got some great offensive players. And I remember him being interviewed one day, and he said, "Yeah, Coach T wanted to always win games 9-6. I want to win them 19-16. And so we kind of came to this happy conclusion. We've certainly given up more goals here than we did at Princeton, but we've certainly scored a lot more. Other than that, as I mentioned, that 96, 97, 98 crew at Princeton was scoring a lot of goals as well. But Matt Brown has you mentioned the Canadians, and we didn't have any Canadians in all those years at Princeton, but meeting these guys and meeting Matt, who's Canadian, and knowing that we could attract that kind of talent here. I had played way back when. I had played box lacrosse in the first NLL in 1974 and 75, and I knew the value of Canadians. I just couldn't convince anybody of that until I got here. And here it didn't take convincing. Here Matt was on board. So I just said, "You take this Canadian recruiting, you get us some offensive players, and Jeremy Noble and all these guys, Westberg and those guys came and been a bunch of them over the years now, Ethan Walker. And so we just know that that's kind of our bread and butter, and we've gone with that. And so it's not easier recruiting. Lacrosse coaches are either, as we would all say, if we would admit what we're doing, is we're all copycats. And so we take from each other, and as I said before, what's old is new and what's new is old. And so we kind of found a niche amongst how to coach and how to recruit here at Denver. And certainly being in a beautiful place that we're in with this beautiful, campus, and being in, we were in the ECAC first. Now we were invited into the Big East, which has been such a blessing for us. It's just kind of gone pretty smoothly over the years. And but without Matt, we're probably not talking here today.
What is his gift as a coach?
Matt sees things that no one else sees. He sees it individually in players. I'll look at a film and say, wow, Matt, we should recruit that kid. He just scored 4 goals. And he'll go, Coach, no, he doesn't push off his gas foot the right way. And I'm like, what the heck are you talking about? And movement and scorers versus shooters, and energy guys that'll ride, like a lot of coaches, but he just sees this game in a different way. He sees it progressing through things like, other people have called some of the things he does window dressing, when he's putting people in position, the ball's moving around. He refers to our offense as ball movement, people movement. And all of a sudden you've got this guy inverted behind on a weak short stick, and bang, he's going, and they didn't even know you were doing it. So all these different kinds of things that I think the other thing that's been really great about Matt is he hasn't been stuck in his ways. We've changed some things over the years. Right now, the big thing in college lacrosse is the 2-man game. Way back when, Metzi and I had one rule. It was you never pick for the ball, because you would get doubled the crap out of you and beat up. Well, now everybody's picking for the ball, and knowing ways from the box game how to take advantage of guys trying to double you or jump you, and then making 3-man plays out of 2-man plays. All these things that Matt does, he just sees the game in a really different way, and I'm just blessed to have him by my side.
We spend a lot of time teaching slip picks now, just to make it easier as we get through things, because defensemen still are never faster than attackmen. But in the pandemic, I have a question. As you talk about speed, you watch a kid on film, you don't get a chance at the moment because you guys are blocked out of recruiting in person until January 1st. The kid looks really fast on film, but the problem is you don't know what he's playing against. He may be playing against people our age, so he looks really fast as compared to. So talk a little bit about, recruiting and kind of going through this pandemic process. That you got to be more diligent, I would think, as a coach.
Yeah, it's been really, really interesting, Greg. It's been eye-opening. I think it's going to change for the rest of future. The way it was, certainly it's, as everybody's been talking about in anything we talk about in our pandemic world, it's the new norm, which is this watching film. But I'll tell you, it's improved everybody. It's improved the club coaches, because they know that they've got to now provide a great film. Little things like having uniforms that we can see their numbers on film, providing rosters, knowing and being in contact with college coaches has been really amazing. I give those guys. And the next thing is it's brought the high school coaches back into the fold, because we haven't been able to really meet these kids. You can go on a Zoom call and that's fine, but when you have them in your office, it's different. You can really get a feel for a kid. And so counting on the high school coach who's around them for 10 months a year, not as opposed to the club coach, because the club coach gets to coach them, in that summer when it's really important, when we can see them. So I think in those ways it's improved. Personally, I will never miss those 12-hour days of sitting in a chair at 100 degrees in Baltimore, sweating my butt off, trying to find a needle in a haystack. That will never be missed. I do miss the camaraderie of that. I think that's been one of the real negatives. I think college coaching right now is on the precipice of being less camaraderie like. It's becoming young people have a little bit more willingness to stab other coaches in the back when it comes to poaching other poaching recruits and talking negatively to recruits. But at the end of the day, I think that if you would ask me to weigh it, I'd say this pandemic, as far as recruiting has gone, has made the world better. I do see that a couple of things now, especially with these 2022 kids that we're now recruiting. They are in a tough spot. I mean, they feel pressure that we're not even putting on them. They know that there's limited spots. The classes are probably going to be a little smaller because of the rule that we can now take in fifth-year guys from other schools, and because our rosters are too big right now because of last year's rules. So I feel like those kids are under some duress and some pressure. I feel like some of the coaches are also been under pressure, but there's the kids, there's still a lot of room for those kids that are seniors this year, the 21s, to end up in great places. Maybe not the place they thought of, but they're also finding out that some of these Division II, Division III, lower Division I programs, club programs throughout the country, are wonderful experiences, and playing, the word playing, on the field, whether it's the school that you dreamed about from the time you're 5 or not, being a player on the field, your parents are still going to buy those jackets. They're still going to be at your games. And you know what? When you win and you play well, I used to say to recruits at RIT when I was there, try to describe for me the difference between Division III happiness and Division I happiness when you win a big game. And they couldn't. Because there is no difference.
Right.
And we're talking about rosters of 50, 60 people right now. Maybe there are other opportunities for these kids from this pandemic that are going to turn out to be really good experiences for them.
You talked a little bit about the landscape of college coaches maybe being a little unsettled at the moment. With is money the issue? And then right now there's a huge argument between travel coaches and high school coaches, because travel coaches have a financial interest in those kids, and kind of tell parents, I can tell you from the club lacrosse college side, where I get kids all the time telling me about the full scholarships they're getting to a club program, or they have a signing for a club program when they're paying. And I lose my mind, because it's lying. It's just flat lying. So I guess my question is money the motivator for sort of this process of unrest? And do you trust a high school coach more than a travel coach? And that's not to indict either one, because there's obviously folks but where do you come down?
Well, caveat being I was both. I was a high school coach, and so I always have loved high school coaches. I still call a lot of those guys that I have relationships with to this day. A lot of these, the ones that, a lot of these guys that I'm close with now are in this other unique situation, which you didn't even bring up, which are these private schools where kids are going for PG years now because they're rolling back a year. And so
Culver Hill, we have a bunch of them around here.
My son-in-law, Dylan Sheridan, is a great college coach, who was with me for 4 years, at Princeton for a year, started the program at Cleveland State, was there for 5 years, was a year at Ohio State. He's now coaching at Western Reserve, where he went to high school. And John Posner, who was at Culver for 17 years,
right,
is now at Lawrenceville. And you look around and you see these college coaches that are coaching at the high school level now. It's a blessing for the profession. I think that the club guys have filled in, as I mentioned earlier, Dave Cottle, Tony Seaman, and I filled a void way back when. We didn't know that we were doing it because we thought it'd be a fun idea for a camp when we invented Top 205. And back then, the only things you went to were Top 205 or the New York State, what they call them, the Empire Games.
Empire State Games.
Yeah, Empire State Games. And then a few other dabbling of things. There wasn't 60, 80, 100 different tournaments on a given weekend. But the club guys, the first club guy I ever knew was a great coach in New Jersey, a guy named Bob Turco. And that was in the mid-90s. He actually had my sons on his team, and Tri-State, and I still think that they're around. But and they would go down to Maryland and play the red shirts and the silver shirts, and that was kind of the beginning of club lacrosse. And then GW Mix started the I forget what he called his club tournament. That was the first one out there down at Hopkins, and then it started growing and growing and growing. So yes, there's money to be made. Yes, there's the opportunity that those coaches are providing, because the high school coaches, for the most part, can't coach their kids in the summer, or didn't have outlets to coach their kids in the summer. And so it's a combination of both. There are people in both sides. We run a club team here, Denver Elite, which my son Trevor runs for us. So we're at both sides of the ledger here. We try to do the right thing, and this summer was a real tough hit for us financially. But with the good goes the bad. And I think the key to your question, Greg, is really, are they good people? Do they really mean what they say? If they don't, there are some real shysters out there in club lacrosse, and there are some really bad high school lacrosse coaches.
Absolutely.
And there are some really great guys in club lacrosse, and there's some really amazing high school coaches. So I just go with, old saying, my dad, the beer truck driver, told me, treat people the way they treat you, and you'll be fine. And that's how I've kind of lived my life. If I trust somebody, whether he's a high school coach, whether he's just a casual fan, or he played in college, or he's a club coach, then I stick with those people and rely on their word for who we recruit.
I coach a high school team in Ann Arbor, and our new defensive coordinator had been at Denver South. He had actually started the high school team I'm at, and he'd left, and he was at Denver South. And we know pretty well. I mentioned to you earlier that my son went to Denver. He was a ski racer there for 3 years. So we know the university well. And I spent a lot of time in Colorado as a ski coach. But he came back from Denver South, and he's now our coordinator. We didn't play, obviously, in the spring. But the relationship he had with your face-off, Trevor Baptiste, Trevor would go out to Denver South and work with his kids. Never asked for a dollar, never asked for a penny. Just that was kind of the way it was. And then he talked a lot about the Denver area. And I guess my question is, you said when you went to Denver, it was sort of a growing area. It's been growing for a while. And if you look at California, it's the same kind of thing. So lacrosse west of the Mississippi is in really good shape. I think, is that a fair statement to make?
Absolutely fair statement. When I got to Princeton in 1987, the fall of 87, I had a young man named Chris McHugh from Denver. And from that point on, all the way through my years at Princeton, I had a kid from Denver on my program. We had California kids, Texas kids, it's Michigan kids. We loved the toughness of the Michigan kid all the time. Foremost being David Morrow, who was the Division I Player of the Year in 1993, and started Warrior Lacrosse, named after his high school team. And so
right. You're right. You played against them a number of times.
Yeah, and so you're absolutely right. I think it was more of the people, the regional feeling of lacrosse has been, we all have thought of that. If you ask somebody who doesn't know much about it, all they'll say it's a, New England, Middle Atlantic, rich kid sport, right? We've all heard that a million times. And yet I do think that those people controlled not so much the game, but the media and it is like they didn't want to let their little secret out, And then of course, guys graduated and went all over the place, and this little secret is such a great game, so enjoyable to play, so enjoyable to watch, so enjoyable to coach and be a part of. You can play it in all different weather. You know all the things that we talk about. That it was just a matter of exploding. And I think that things like the Final Fours, things like these high school tournaments where kids are coming from Michigan, kids are coming from California and playing all those Baltimore and Long Island teams, it's just made the world a lot better. And my dream is for, and I probably won't be around to see it, but to see some of these big power conferences, the SEC, the Pac-12, finally have legitimate lacrosse programs, as in the near future.
In the old days, you wanted an attackman from Long Island. Do you still believe in regionalism, the idea that there are certain places that develop players different ways? If you look at the national rosters of all of the teams that we talk about, from Yale to Denver to Notre Dame to the bigger schools,
Sure.
your roster is not just dotted with Colorado kids. It's a national roster, as it is in most of the top 25 programs. And I think that's how it's changed. Is that pretty accurate?
It's very accurate. We just committed a kid from Kansas City for next year, and he will be a young man when he arrives here from our 34th different state since I've been here at Denver. And so we have kids from Alabama, Florida. We've had them from all over the place, and we're trying to pick, get one at a time and make sure we try to do that. But those, you still see that it's less now, but you still see that high quality skill guy from Baltimore. I do still think that the reason the Baltimore kids have a little bit more, they come in a little bit more prepared, is because they play such a tough high school schedule, game in and game out, and they're coached by guys who really know the game. The Long Island kid is still that tough kid who's expected to be knocked around a little bit more. But those things have really become foggy and gray and all that stuff. We, oftentimes we'll say, we won't put them into states anymore. We'll put them into types of people. Can the kid be a two-handed X guy? Can they, face-off guys? You mentioned Trevor. We've got a young man, Alex Stathakis from Michigan right now, who's one of the best in the country. Another one from Colorado, just recruited one from New York City. So it doesn't matter to us. It just, we just got to make sure that we know what we want, and then go out and find the who we want, and it works pretty well for us.
A couple of quick questions to finish with. You're looking at players, IQ, physicality. You want both, but if you had the choice, the both, if you have physicality and IQ, he's an All-American, but you can't fill your roster with completely All-American. So right. Physicality or IQ for you?
IQ, because an IQ guy can stay out of the way of getting run over by a physical guy. Now, I love physical guys, don't get me wrong, right. But you don't see, when you see a real IQ guy, you can pick him out. I always tell a story about, we had this great defenseman, Carson Cannon, was from Minnesota, and Matt Brown's wife brought him. We had a local tournament up at Dick's Sporting Goods Park, and Matt and I were on the road, and his wife, I don't know why she was up at Dick's one time, but she stopped and watched this game. And when we came home, she goes, "You got to recruit this kid from Minnesota." We're like, "What are you talking about?" And she said she just could see that he knew how to play the game. This guy ends up becoming an All-American for us at Denver in our championship year. So I think when you see those guys, you know them. It's the other guys. It's that 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 guy that now you say, get us that tough guy. Right. We'll teach him how to throw and catch. Get us that tough guy, or that fast guy, or that leader, that captain.
I would be remiss of not hitting on demeanor, and you have lots of people that have opinions and stories about Bill Tierney's sidelines and the way you operate and the rest of it. So my question to you is, this is the first time I had a chance to talk to you. I've been in the vicinity of the way you've coached and things, and I've always admired it. You're straight ahead, you're honest, and maybe that's something our generation. But does the toughness that you have come from a dad who drove a beer truck?
Yeah, I tell this story often. Is my dad was a beer truck driver and my mom was a nurse. So with my dad, it would be, this is a true story. Well, you had to be at the dinner table at 6, right? Or you didn't eat. You had to finish everything on your plate. All that stuff that all of us went through. But I remember one time, I forget what I did wrong. Probably I did that on purpose. I forget what I did wrong, but I remember being chased up the stairs with the black belt out, and he couldn't catch me. So I was probably like 14, 15. He slammed the door closed, and he yells through the door, "That's it. You're punished for a year." I go, "A year? Holy crap." I forget what I did, but it must have been pretty bad. I'm up in my room 15, 20 minutes later. My mom comes up and knocks on the door. She goes, aren't you going out with your friends? I go, Mom, Dad just punished me for a year. She goes, he's asleep. You can go out. So I always refer to my upbringing as being yin and yang, and my mom was a nurse in our school district. All my friends knew my mom. They could go to her office if they didn't do their homework, make like they had a stomach ache, and reluctant, and then suddenly get better when the next class started. And she was always Mrs. T, and my dad, everybody knew he was the chief of the volunteer fire department. He was a beer truck driver, and you just stated, you didn't mess with him. And like you didn't mess with a lot of fathers in our neighborhood, they had seen things in World War II that we never dream about seeing, and never talked about them. But you knew darn well that those times came back, and there were some good things and some not so good things, but you knew growing up. And so when you see that guy on the sideline, it's you ever see that cartoon with the angel on one shoulder and the devil on the other? That's me. And I think, I can honestly say that when the game's over, it's over. And I know that's a flaw in my personality. I will tell you that I have had many officials when they stopped doing my games, say how much they enjoyed doing my games, and how if they had a son, they would want him to play for me. So, I'm not proud of that, but I do know that it's who I am, and I know that all of us have faults, and I try to get better. And maybe, and I was thinking about this morning, maybe if this year we're forced to coach with masks on, it'll change me. We'll see.
Well, I think with your daughter, having gone to Michigan State, I think you would have, not that you know anything about my background, but I was probably Bobby Knight-like and a little bit Bill Tierney-like. And I had to go coach young ladies, having never had a daughter or having never had a sister. And I spent, I knew all there is to know about sports because I'd coached a variety of sports. And, I was coming home the first year, driving back from East Lansing to Detroit, crying in my car because I could not get 35 young ladies on the same page for the same reason. And I'd call my cousin up, who was a softball coach at the high school level, the varsity coach, and I would just lose my mind. How do you get 35 people? And I finally decided to surrender, and pretty much whatever it made you a better coach because you had to listen. And I think that's the lessons that we get.
That lesson is very important now because kids have changed. And if you don't surrender, and if you don't listen, and if it's your way or the highway, you are going nowhere fast. And I've been blessed over my career to have so many great families and so many great kids. But if I haven't learned in the last 5 to 8 years to start listening and trying to understand them, then we probably wouldn't be talking here today.
And there's probably a reason why there's still a gleam in your eye, because it means that much to you. And I think that's important. Last question. I just have to touch on this. Face-off rules. We're talking about all kinds of goofy, not having face-off rules. You take the ball up behind the net, you give it a free clear at the midline. The college rule is going to be different from the high school rule, but any thoughts on just where they're headed with face-offs based on the pandemic?
Well, I think, having been the IMLCA is our coaches group, the college coaches group, and now high school coaches are involved, and it's really a great group. But I was their representative to the NCAA Rules Committee for 12 years, up until 2 years ago when I stepped down and gave it to Dave Petramala. And every year for the last, God knows, 20, 30 years, the things that always come up are face-off, dive, pace of play, that kind of stuff. Right. I don't believe the face-off will ever leave the game. When it comes down to a serious discussion in any of those power groups, the ones that have control of this thing, ultimately it comes back, thankfully, into the history of the game. It's a unique part of the history of the game. And my take on it is, when we've had great ones, when Trevor Baptiste was here, people would say, we should take the face-off out of the game. We had a young man before him named Chase Carrero. We've had guys be good face-off guys. My answer to that is, that's like saying, if you have a great goalie, you should not let him play. Recruit a great face-off guy. coach a great face-off guy. As you mentioned, you coach young ladies. You had to learn about, the draw, standing up, and rules like that. And so, So number one, I don't think the face-off's going away. In light of the pandemic, if we learn anything from football, it's either going to be that we shut down all sports, or we learn that 300-pound linemen can breathe and spit and everything all over each other for games and still be okay. So a face-off guy is going to be all right. We are currently practicing here at the University of Denver in 10-person cohorts, and a city ordinance is that we have to wear masks during practice. And it's tough on the kids. It's tough. But you know what? If that's the toughest thing we go through with over 200,000 people dying in our country, then too bad. Then be tough and get your way through it. But I think it's going to be okay. The face-off rules keep changing. People have this idea that if they change the grip, they're going to take away the long, drawn out, two rhinoceroses going at it. And maybe they will. Maybe it'll create some more face-off, some more ground balls. But whenever you change a rule like that, you also bring on another problem. So, we'll see what happens with it. I thought last year the face-off had gotten to be the best that it ever was, with the width of the sticks and the refs really taking their time to make sure the ball was in the middle and getting away from it and blowing the whistle pretty consistently. But, we're always trying to change something. We'll see what happens with it. But personally, I hope it never goes away. But I hope they're happy with the changes they make so that we can move on to other things more important than that.
We have in recent weeks had a number of rule changes and discussions here, and I keep bringing up the dunk rule with Lou Alcindor at the time, with obviously later Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. I said they put a non-dunking rule in college because there was a 7'3" guy that could dominate the game. When he graduated from college, 3 years later, they changed it back because they realized it was kind of a dumb rule to make a specific rule for one guy. And if you're bigger, faster, stronger, and I think women lacrosse at this point, with some of the things we're doing with that sport, bigger, faster, stronger beats everybody. It's that simple. And you can't legislate, I'd like to have hair, but the reality to it is, either get a wig or be happy wearing hats.
Right.
So,
well, in 1979, they took the face-off out for a year in college lacrosse, and it was a total disaster. They put the ball in the middle of the field with a 10-yard circle around them. Kid had the ball, and then they blew a whistle.
Right.
It was mass mayhem. So, right. And that was because of, I believe it was Doug Radebaugh at Hopkins won like 90% the year before. Well, he was the best face-off guy,
Coach, I wanted to thank you for the time. This has been such a terrific interview, and I can see why all the success has come the way that it's come for you. You're really fun to talk to, and this has been one of the best conversations I've had in lacrosse in my lifetime. And I say that not blowing smoke. I really think that Denver's headed to some great things. You've left a trail of unbelievable success, and the folks who've been able to be touched by your working with them and around them. So I can't say how much we appreciate this interview.
No, Greg, I appreciate you having me on, and it's always a blessing to be able to to talk lacrosse, and hopefully as I always say, if somebody can get one little thing out of it, then great. If not, then that's okay too. At least we've talked lacrosse, and I think lacrosse people have that common thread of whether we like to play fast or play slow or 10-man ride or don't ride at all, have that common thread of there's a dignity and a love between guys that coach lacrosse, and I'm proud to be a part of it.
Appreciate your time, and again, thanks so much for your interview. Be safe as well.
Yep.
Coach, thank you. Coach, thank you so much. This is really so cool.
Thanks, Greg. It was fun. It was a lot of fun, and happy to do it anytime. If you ever want to get Matt on, let me know, and I'll set him up.
You know what? Maybe as we get towards December, I want to love to talk to him. I had come out of the box world, and 25 years ago, somebody said, "By the way, we want you to be our lacrosse coach." And I said, "Where's the rink?"
Exactly.
What are you talking about? He said, "We play field lacrosse." And I laughed. I said, "There's not a chance in hell that's the case." And come to find out, and this is in California at the time, and I said, "I don't have any idea." So I literally did not know, and I got invited to go to Notre Dame from when I was in California. So Kevin put me in charge of the attacks. He's got this list of words, and there's like 6 different words on it. And I said, he wanted me to explain this to the group running the kids for attacks. And I thought, well, I'm not going to embarrass myself by not knowing the names. So what I'm going to do is, why don't you have whoever the Notre Dame player, Mark, why don't you come out here and explain to the group what this first, and use the name. And so he walked through it. It turned out to be a question mark or whatever it was. And he had a different set of names for it. And I thought, well, maybe I'm not as dumb as I faked it till I made it. One of the things that I learned early on was that, having spent other sports, is that I like to score a lot. My high school teams average about 60 shots a game. We pulled a lot from Jamie. Actually, and so you watch Matt, and that there's a lot of things they're very reminiscent to him. And I think Matt for you is a lot like Jerry was for Kevin in terms of defense. You got that.
No question. No question.
Unbelievable head coach. He's an assistant. That's not affordable in the rest of it. So when we got our kid back from Denver South, Jack Robino, all of a sudden I got 3 head coaches on the line, and I got 2 Division I kids that played for Michigan who were in grad. Well, all of a sudden our program takes off because you've got all of these coaches being able to have it. And I think that's a huge thing. So,
yeah, funny quick story. When I was, I got hired at Hopkins in March of my last year at RIT. So I had to finish the season. But as soon as our season was over, we lost to Hobart in the semifinal Division III tournament. I get a call from Don Zimmerman to go scout Syracuse, because this was '84. They were looking ahead to playing them, which they ended up doing. So I go to Syracuse. I'm thinking of Mr. Big, I'm going to scout here, go up in the box. They got a place for me. They fly me down right after the game to Baltimore, get there the next meeting. This was in the years where there was no limit on the number of coaches there. So at the time, there was 11 coaches on the Hopkins staff. 10 of them had gone to Hopkins. So I sit down at this table. It's me and the 10 Hopkins coaches. And the first question they ask is, they go, Jerry Pfeiffer, who was a great defensive mind, he was a goalie coach and a head football coach at Hopkins at the time. He says, so does Syracuse still play spaghetti? And I go, I don't know. What does that mean?
Right.
He turns to Zim and he goes, this is right in front of me. You hired this guy and he doesn't know what spaghetti is? That was my indoctrination to Hopkins.
And last story, 6 years ago, John Kenny, you might know John, we brought some speakers in, and we brought Petro in, and we brought Don in. It's like it was Don's last year at UMBC, so probably maybe 10 years ago, years ago.
Yeah, whatever, right.
So we decided to Zimmer was going to be the second to last speaker, but his plane was running late, so we had to make him last. So the last question that was asked of Petro was, how come you never shake hands with the opposing coach during a game? He said, why would I scheme all week to beat somebody's ass and then turn around and want to shake hands to him at the end of the game? He says, all that sportsmanship's crap. So he has this great 20 minutes, 45 minutes, whatever it was in front of this. We got 250 high school coaches. And then Don comes in, and he's got that sort of lilt when he talks.
Yep.
And I don't think he raised his voice more than about right here.
That's right.
But when it was done, and there was a break in between Petro and Don coming in. Right. And when he came in, everybody's like, oh my God, now we got to sit through this guy. Because none of the new guys knew what his background was. They just knew some guys coming in from Baltimore County.
Right.
It was done. I was getting hugs from coaches because John was nice enough. Where did you get this guy? Holy shit. And then somebody started to do, so I was writing a column on the back page that was then the Michigan Lacrosse magazine. And I went back through and I simply listed his credentials. And then I talked about what had happened, basically with the same thing you and I are talking. And it was amazing. And not that he didn't deserve the recognition. He certainly did. but I couldn't imagine how these coaches, these high school coaches, didn't know who he was. But these guys have been coaching for 2, 3, 4 years. They just didn't understand the history.
Yeah, right. Exactly. They're young, and it's what lacrosse is always. I tell Trevor Baptiste, he's my latest one, right? Say, Trevor, enjoy these next 5 years, because in 5 years it's going to be who's he.
Yeah, for real. Coach, again, a real pleasure. You be safe.
Well, thanks. Anytime, and if you want to get a hold of Matt, let me know.
I will. I absolutely will. Appreciate your time, sir.
See you, Greg.
Thanks.